welcome.
The Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community is a regulatory science initiative that aims to facilitate innovations in pathology, as well as advance safety and effectiveness evaluation. The PIcc Collaborative Community aims to harmonise approaches to speed delivery to patients through collaboration in the pre-competitive space. The PICC is open to all stakeholders, public or private, including but not limited to academia, industry, healthcare providers, patients, and advocacy groups. Meetings of this kind are an example of lawful activity under federal antitrust law because the focus of the meeting is on government action or policy, including the industry's responses or positions taken with respect thereto. However, antitrust monitoring is needed for companies' own protection, since they are direct competitors meeting together. These meetings need to stay within protected subject matters and need to be monitored so that they do not stray off into inappropriate areas, such as pricing and price terms, sales and service territories for particular products, customers and customer territories, each company's individual decisions regarding selection of suppliers or customers, marketing plans and especially future marketing plans or new product offerings, other proprietary or competitively sensitive information. Today's meeting will follow the written agenda, and there will be no discussion of pricing or other prohibited topics. If the discussion veers into those topics, we will terminate the discussion. If you have any questions or concerns about the propriety of the discussion, please raise it immediately, and we will take a break to determine how best to proceed. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium acts as the formal convener, and we will follow their conflict of interest policy. For additional information, we defer to our Code of Conduct and our website, www.pathologyinnovationcc.org. We look forward to moving the field forward.
Okay.
Do you have a way to maybe text Ula?
I don't know if I have her phone number. Let me quickly check.
She just joined, and it looks like
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So we're all good now.
We should be good.
Thanks, Ula.
Yeah, no problem.
Great. And Zach or Jay, are you guys on the line yet?
Yeah, Jay Allman here from the AMA.
Hey, Jay, it's Charles. How are you?
Hey, good, Charles. Good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Absolutely.
I was clicking through the invite list there. Looks like I think Zach was going to try and join us as well.
I see Zach on there actually. He's popped on.
Oh, great.
Yep.
Well, we still have some folks kind of zooming in from our side, but I think we can go and get started. I just wanted to open it up by just thanking you, Jay and Zach, for your time. One of the things that I've been participating in really in earnest since actually 2 Januaries ago, I went to the Digital Pathology Alliance meeting in Los Angeles and participated in a payer advisory work group that had actually Anya Wooding from CAP was involved in that discussion as well. And subsequent to that time, we've been learning a lot about digital pathology by working with this group. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about is kind of, what are different things that need to happen in the reimbursement environment to really see payer reimbursement come full force for digital pathology technologies and techniques. And there was a discussion about, well, maybe this group should apply for a CPT code. And I said, well, maybe because it is a new category and it is kind of a new concept, maybe rather before submitting an application for a particular technology, it might be good to have a discussion with the AMA about what is this category and how might it fit within the system. And so that's why I reached out to you initially, Jay, knowing that you've been a real strong advocate for just building bridges between the AMA and industry and different organizations, and just trying to get a better understanding of what's out there and making sure that the CPT system is as adaptive and accommodative as possible to try and incorporate new technologies, but also do so in a way that doesn't favor individual companies, those kind of things. So that's why I reached out to you about setting up the time today. This actually is the recurring time slot for this work group's meeting, and it's a group comprised, and you'll hear from some of them in a moment, of kind of academia, people actually, applying digital pathology tools on an everyday basis in the clinic, but then also, industry advocacy, and folks like myself as consultants. So it's a mixture of individuals. So just wanted to thank you for your time today. We put together a few slides to just kind of give you a quick overview of some of what's going on in digital pathology. I had a few comments and questions about what it might mean for CPT, but we can kind of table that until you get an overview. But anything from your perspective, Jay, in terms of what you lay out for an agenda, or what would you like to accomplish?
No, just really wanted to learn from you all. This is it would be a new field for me, so I'd appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and agree. Sorry, my microphone was off. So I am here, and yeah, just wanted to. Me and Jay were sort of talking about before this call. We didn't really have a lot of upfront expectations, but wanted to learn a little bit more about what this group does. But then also, what are the challenges that you're facing, and sort of how do you personally then, or this group feels that CPT might play a role in that?
Great. Well, then with that, maybe I'll hand it off to Esther and Joe. They're very much the leaders of this group, and they've done a lot of work to organize this. We have a few slides that just kind of describe some of these things, and we'll take you through those. But maybe Esther, you just want to kick things off with a broader kind of introduction to the digital pathology group.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, and thanks, Charles, for introducing us. And it's great. It's my pleasure to be here, and it's fantastic, Jay and Zach, that you're taking the time and showing your interest. It's fantastic. And my apologies for not having my camera on. I've been issues with my computer, and I'm so happy I received my new computer last Friday, but now IT is working on installing it. So hopefully next time we speak, I can turn on my camera. Anyway, what we would like to do, if you go to the next slide, Laura, what we would like to do is first give you a brief introduction of what is the PIcc, also give you a little bit of background that there are different alliances, associations that are working on digital pathology, and give you a little bit of background in that one. And then Joe will take it over to talk a little bit more about the pathologist perspective, the user perspective. So first, the Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community, the PIcc, started actually as an alliance for digital pathology with about 12 members maybe back in 2018. We've now grown to over 400 members. Our goal was and still is to increase adoption and drive the use of digital pathology. And we noticed that in the field of digital pathology, there's also, there's a lack of formalized collaborative relationships between many different entities like regulatory, basic, and translational sciences and industry. And also moreover with the patients. So with the Alliance, we really wanted to bring all these different entities together and really drive the important clinical innovation and getting that available for patients so that patient management can be improved. And we're doing that by having small focused projects or tasks and providing publicly available resources, like you can think of white papers, data tools, etc. We also wanted to be all inclusive. That was one of the things that we were very clear from the beginning. And we want to present all stakeholders in digital pathology. So it's non-profit, nobody has to pay a membership fee, and we're in the pre-competitive space and all about regulatory sciences. So that is more or less what the PIcc is. So we started as Alliance, and now we're PIcc. And this collaborative community is really also came from the FDA. So when did we transition? So in 2018 we started. Last year we transitioned from Alliance to PIcc, and the FDA launched a collaborative community program and asked us if we wanted to join that. And it's this collaborative program really is encouraging stakeholders to work on shared challenges, which we obviously have, and that will help. The idea is that will help building, for example, foundations for policy making or regulatory decisions that are going to be made, or regulatory requirements that's going to be written. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium is also a big player here. They're convener for this PIcc. And as Charles was saying, we meet regularly to discuss projects and progress, and everybody can suggest a project to work on. So, and an important thing to note is that this group is a working group, and we call it the Payor working group, so to say. And it's represented by different people from industry, but also from patient advocacy groups, as well as life sciences, and Charles, of course, with links to life sciences. But also people within this group are also part of, for example, the Digital Pathology Association. And I think that is an important part to mention, because the DPA has the same goal as the PIcc. Also, the DPA is working on reimbursement strategies. And they also, and how we align so that we're not duplicating effort is that within the DPA, for example, now pointing to myself, I'm also chairing there the Regulatory and Standards Task Force, and contributing to the payer strategy in the DPA. So we're making sure that whatever is discussed here, that we will not duplicating efforts, but all with the same goal, right? Focusing to get innovation to the market for patients. I'm not the only one. I know that Carla, for example, is also in the DPA. Eric is in the DPA. So that's how we want to work together. Then if you go, I think it's in the next slide, Laura, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, and what we really want to focus on with this Payor work group is that we identified, when we set this Payor working group up, there are things that we need to improve. For example, the return of investment is not really clear for digital pathology. So we noticed that the adoption is really slow, and we want to improve that. We want to drive the adoption. The connection, as I mentioned before, between industry, research, etc., is there, but it should be improved to make this happen, to allow communication, to allow driving adoption and start using it, because there's a big advantage of using digital pathology, and Joe will come back to that later. And then, and we want to show that the patient and outcome, that it demonstrates added value. It's not only like pieces of it, no, but the entire continuum, how digital pathology can be used in the entire patient management process, how it will add value. And why are we working on it now? Well, we found that it's time to refocus our efforts and really on efficiency and everything that we're doing to get this adoption and bringing things to the markets to increase that, so that patients will ultimately benefit to it. So having said that, this is the problem statement that we have identified for now. Well, let me first pause there. Is there any questions on the background of what the PIcc is doing, and the difference with the DPA, and what this working group is focusing on?
This is Jay. No questions for me. And Esther, I appreciate that. I just went through the change to a new ISP provider yesterday. So technology issues are not foreign to me. So you're doing a fine job. So, but no questions. Thanks.
Yeah, Jay, just to give you a bit more flavor on kind of who's involved in this industry, you have some large players like Philips, Payor, like the kind of players in other medical device and diagnostic areas that are developing tools and scanners and things like that. And then you also have a wave of like totally new kind of digital pathology players, which actually have interesting blurred lines between kind of software technologies applying things like AI and machine learning, but then also more traditional kind of pathology tools. So entities like PathAI, Page, Visiopharm, you'll hear some of those names. So it's an interesting industry with kind of a mixture of players, both large and small, kind of all coming together. What I like about this group that Esther and Joe have formed is it's very open in terms of, like, you know, there's some very small early stage innovators, but then also, you know, into like a Philips might be involved. It just is creating a forum for everybody who wants to see this kind of evolve. There is an ecosystem challenge. Like, for digital pathology really to work, you need actually quite a few things. You need the data component, the scanner component, that people understand, you know, training, the software, you know, kind of, there's a lot to set up to make it work. So this is why this group has been formed, to kind of help create and foster that ecosystem. Sorry, Esther, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks. Really good additions. Thanks. So yeah, actually, if you look then at what is our problem, so to say, what is our shared challenge? Well, tissue, probably Joe can talk much better about it than I can, but in tissue, the histology, the phenotyping, it's hard to differentiate patterns in tissue. And as we all know, pathologists do a great job there, but it's prone to errors, of course. It's hard to, for example, look with a human eye at something and then estimate how much percentage of that tissue that you see under the microscope is, for example, has cancerous tissue or has these type of immune cells that are positive for a particular stain. Then talking about these stains, these can be influenced by pre-analytical factors in the lab, for example, how you process your tissue, but also how you stain it, what kind of staining protocol you follow. And we know, we've seen studies that if there is some less quality of staining, that could lead to false negatives or false positive, at least to misdiagnosis in 30% of cases, for example. And that's a big thing. Then there's human factors. As I already mentioned, human eye has limited capacity. So with trying to find, and also the brain, right? Trying to find patterns or trying to see kind of stereology, morphology, or see changes or whatsoever, that's hard to do, combining all that in your brain. And with your human eye as well. And they cannot always capture everything, right? A computer might identify more and help you to solve that, or at least identify it. Then with regards to cost, in contrast to radiology, there was already had technology that could be replaced. With digital pathology, it's some innovation that happens. That's the most innovative element that happened in pathology over the last 30 years or something, or maybe 40 even. So it's like a big leap. And we even had to come up with new scanners, and that adds extra cost to it, because also the entire infrastructure around it, as Charles was mentioning, like IT, again, IT is popping up, how much storage space you would have at your lab, because these slides consume so much more storage space than for example, it will require in radiology. So that's something that brings additional costs to labs if they want to convert from analog to digital. Then with regards to patient access, it's not available everywhere. For example, in the underserved areas, subspecialties and pathologies are rare. So how do those patients get access to subspecialists so that they get a more accurate diagnosis? So with these problems, you could have resulted in incorrect patient management and treatments, and with that, increasing healthcare costs, because they have more side effects, for example, are treated incorrectly, or you need to have more retests done, etc. So with digital pathology, we're trying to solve at least this problem with regards to patient management, because we believe that it can help, and there are already studies on that it improves the accuracy of diagnosis, and definitely also the consistency in how you diagnose, but also between pathologists, that they diagnose more consistent. So a big thing is in the adoption, and I want to reiterate that, is that in the US it's lagging, and it's even lagging more than in Europe. I think the adoption is bigger over there. Is really because due to lack of funding and making these benefits inaccessible to many labs and hospitals. And we believe that with some with reimbursements that we could overcome this hurdle. Then if you can go to the next slide, then I think it's I'll give it to Joe. Joe, floor is all yours.
Sure. Do you mind switching off the screen sharing? Because I thought I wanted to show you what this actually looks like. Do you mind? Is that possible? I don't know if you can see this, but this is a slide. On there is a piece of lung. And that thing here on the edge here, the dark blue, that's cancer. Like, I don't know if this makes sense. There's no patient information on here or anything. This is a section, 5 micrometer thick, put on a glass slide, covered with a cover slip. And what's currently used is this thing here, the microscope. And we put it on here, and we look at it, and that's the medical procedure. What is shown on the next couple of slides, and if we can go back to the slide deck, but I just wanted to show you, this is archaic.
That's helpful. Yeah.
This is archaic. Like, this is the same microscope that you probably used in your science class back in high school. And most people do not believe me when I say, yes, that's how we diagnose cancer. My son is 13 and he said, that's what you do that? It's ridiculous, right? And that is the last missing element in the medical record. I just wanted to drive home. That's kind of the bottom line. And currently we don't have even a way to track this in terms of numbers if people digitize it. So what's shown here is it's, you know, the field has moved in terms of like the medical profession has moved to these complicated deep learning, machine learning tools, but cancer diagnostics or any diagnostics that's tissue-based is still lagging behind. If you look at, for example, this clinical workflow, you don't even see a microscope on this anymore, but the current coding and let's call it tracking of what we do is still based on a microscope. So if you go to the next slide, there's, you know, this desire on the one hand that we want to replace this. So in this very busy diagram, if you look at the top left where it says, you know, there's like a little microscope displayed. So you have to store the slides in an archive, you get the slide out, you look at it in the microscope, and it seems as if we're doing something fairly simple. We scan the slide. And then you have the pixel data, but that has to be integrated with all this other data that goes into the medical record, and all the rest has, let's call it like all the other fields have codes for it, have ways to track it. And this component that we want to just take the glass slide and digitize it comes along with a ton of other sort of like realms. For example, metadata integration into the file formats. If you go to the next slide, once that's digital, you can do fairly simple things. Of course, just what my limitation is, I would love to show you what this looks like under scope, but I can't because it's not digital. But once you look at this under a slide, and this is an application by one of the people who's on the call, Carla, and her company, and it kind of eliminates, grays out in a way, the non-cancer to show a pathologist, hey, this is a region of interest, you should look at this. That can, I mean, there's tons of implications for that. They can speed up certain processes, or, you know, there's certain value propositions with this. Now, what happened during the COVID pandemic is a lot of pathologists were, to be honest, you know, disincentivized to work on their site because it was dangerous, so they could work from home, and a certain rule set has changed. So a lot of people were able to adopt this and have started using it. Now we're still in a public health emergency, so at some point that will go away, but we put this on here that basically this pandemic has created an incentive for people to use it. And we have, others have, and it works quite well, but that adoption that Esther has beautifully outlined as one of our aims, obviously, as you know, CPT codes are one way to track these procedures. And, you know, ultimately doing this is, I don't know, our shared interest. But once that becomes digital, there is a whole set of downstream visual or computer aided tools that can be applied to it, because right now we can't even access the data because it's present, here shown in the physical world, not in the digital world. So we put there the current first key problem at hand is that we can't track this medical procedure. But the bigger aim that I think Esther has outlined, and what the aim of this entire group is to unlock the potential of digitizing this last missing piece of, let's say, image data from the medical record. If you go to the next slide, we thought of like going into a bit of the details so you know that this is not just a pitch. So, for example, if I had the ability to show this to you just like on the last slide, and you would be a pathologist, you can render your opinion and share that with me. Now you can say, well, you can stick a USB camera on the microscope and do that, but it shouldn't be necessarily live. And data processing, of course, happens in the giga and terabyte range here. So that is definitely something about second opinions, also in regions that may otherwise not have that service. The second part to be put there is rare diseases. Pathology is subspecialized, just like medicine. And sometimes you identify, let's say, a lesion in the lung where you need a lung expert, or in the heart where you need a cardiac pathologist, etc. The third point here is consistency. I think Esther has beautifully outlined that, so I won't spend a lot of time. And then the other points on the bottom is there's certain like operational components, like you could run every single case through an AI algorithm to say, did anyone miss cancer here? And then, have automatic, let's say, quality improvements that happens. But I think those come a little bit later, or like, verification of human calls. But at the very point, like, there are many applications, is what we're trying to say. If you go to the next slide, please. So I think let's stay on this slide because we want to use the time also wisely to discuss with you. So this is kind of a case just to make the point. And we didn't choose cancer for various reasons, but let's say, there's a girl presenting with edema and some electrolyte abnormalities on Tuesday. Wednesday, she may be admitted. Thursday, the team says, look, we can't figure out what this is. Let's perform a renal biopsy. Of course, there's those 2 days, big story, but the renal biopsy will be performed, let's say, at a smaller hospital without a renal pathologist, meaning the subspecialty expertise may not be there, but most pathologists can read a renal biopsy. But on Thursday night, the patient status changes and it becomes critical, in this case with seizures. And then on Friday morning, the pediatric nephrologist, so we're talking about a subspecialty of internal medicine. So clearly it's not that small of a hospital, but that pediatric subspecialty nephrologist says, I want to hear what the pathologist says. Normally, Friday afternoon, the slides would come out and the pathologist would say, hey, these should really be sent to a tertiary care hospital or someone with subspecialty expertise. And then let's assume the person and their admins make the cutoff, send the slides out on Friday with overnight shipping, may arrive on Monday morning, and the other pathologists would immediately get in touch with the pediatric nephrologist, would notify, yes, this is a certain disease. The alternative, this is a very concrete example, of course, but could be that in a small hospital, the biopsy is scanned in the morning when the slides come out, and then the pathologist can dial his or her favorite pediatric nephrology pathologist, meaning renal pathologist, and say, hey, can you take a look? Now, both could then ultimately, have a Zoom call with the physician and explain the results. So what's shown here is just it looks like a tiny issue, but this is happening all the time, especially getting subspecialty expertise to relevant patient populations. So simply put, this is a patient access problem, but it's very intricate and happening behind the curtain, or proverbial curtain of patient care. And then I think one more slide is sort of, and I think this is the part where I may hand it over. But if you look at what this would be encoded, like this particular case, and we added there some to special studies. I mean, special stains, immunofluorescence is its own little method, and electron microscopy is another method. These can be portrayed, but there are certain issues with that. And I think, Charles, you wanted to take over from here. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick it up. But maybe before we kind of continue the presentation, Jay, it might be helpful to hear from your perspective. You know, we've given you a kind of quick overview of digital pathology, but I'd just love to hear any preliminary thoughts you have. And we kind of went right into it, and we didn't give you much of a chance to kind of introduce yourself and Zach to the group in terms of kind of your role and what types of dialogues you can entertain. I think that'd be helpful for everybody to understand. I can tell you, I've told this group, like, don't come out of this meeting expecting a new CPT code to come out right away, because there's a whole process associated with that. But maybe some words from your end and kind of what you're all about, I think would be really helpful to everybody.
Sure. So I'm Jay Allman. I'm the Vice President of, the official title is CPT Coding and Reimbursement Policy and Strategy. It's basically the Vice President of the CPT group at the AMA. So supporting the CPT editorial panel, the 17-member body convened by the AMA to maintain the CPT code set. It is an independent body. So even if Zach and I thought this was the greatest thing ever and wanted to bring forward a code change application, we technically probably could, but it wouldn't be the best thing, because the AMA does not direct the changes to CPT. That comes from folks like yourselves, the medical specialties, innovators, large companies. Philips, as you mentioned, Philips a couple times. They've come to us many times, and maybe some of you have as well. And so why this is all interesting to me is actually the chair of the CPT editorial panel is Mark Sinovic. Dr. Sinovic is a practicing pathologist. I've worked with Mark since I started in my role in this role in 2007. So he and I have had quite a journey living through things like MAAAs, developing our MOPAS section and genomic sequencing procedures. And then this is obviously a separate but very important part of CPT, which is actually the part of CPT Mark practices in. So it's very interesting to me, because these are the types of things he and I talk about all the time. I'm also the, from the AMA side, I'm also the lead called the Digital Medicine Payment Advisory Group, which was convened by the AMA to actually work on some of the issues around moving digital medicine technologies from just idea into clinical practice, which led to the changes in CPT, like remote physiologic monitoring codes, internet consultations. We just came out with some remote therapeutic monitoring codes, and some other things that have come to the CPT editorial panel. So that is myself, and maybe I'll ask Zach to do a brief introduction of himself.
Yeah, my name is Zach Hostetler. I'm the director of the CPT editorial department underneath Jay. Sorry, my video, I have a small office that I use, and I'm on the less fancy internet. And so if I switch, I'll get dropped. So rather than do that, so it's a little unstable for video. But yeah, so I've been in this role a little over 3 years, and directly work with Dr. Sinovic and then the other members of the panel to process all the applications that are coming through, but also beyond just sort of the immediate work of the applications, working with stakeholders like this group and others who are sort of thinking about the future of CPT, and specifically how do we integrate augmented intelligence, or even just sort of the digitization of medicine into the future of CPT. As Jay may have mentioned previously, we've been so focused over the last 50+ years on the physician, the human interaction and work involved in medical procedures, but are now needing to, and have for the last 5 to 10 years, wrestled with sort of what is the future of medicine going to look like, but what also with that change, what CPT will look like as as we sort of rethink how procedures are reported. And again, a lot of that comes with payer implications as to what Medicare currently thinks about sort of some of the digital components of this, and sort of moving forward with, would we, so how do we sort of look at these different issues? So there's a lot of moving parts, and these are, obviously early discussions, but really important discussions as healthcare is moving a lot faster than I think any of us all even truly understand from our own unique perspectives. So.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Zach. And one of the questions that I had was, just thinking about digital pathology. On the one hand, it's quite novel, the application of the slide scanning and the software algorithm, those kind of things. On the other hand, it's an innovation within pathology, and there is an established kind of coding structure around pathology. So Jay or Zach, have you been involved in dialogues about digital pathology previously? Has it been something that Dr. Sinovic has talked about, but maybe put on the table, or put on the shelf for a period while we're working through some of the other things, or is it totally new area for you guys?
Well, it's not totally new. I mean, we've definitely talked about, but we haven't talked about it within the context of it needs CPT codes. We've talked about it just in the context of what's happening in medicine. So, and as I look at this slide, and I think this is a really important one, the thing I'm trying to kind of get straight in my mind is, is there the need to distinctly codify a new service, or is it the need to look at existing codes that are now potentially need to be updated, but could accommodate these new technologies? I'm not saying that very eloquently, but I guess what I'm trying to, I think as I was listening and learning, what I was hearing is, it seems like there's, and I think this is the one I'd want to dig into, a little bit of different work in terms of the interpretation and analysis. But what I was hearing more of is the different technologies that are associated with supporting some of the existing services. And those new technologies were not even probably contemplated when the existing CPT codes were created, which may need, potentially need for, looking at the codes themselves. And I'm not suggesting that the codes need to be changed or new codes are needed. I'm just trying to get my arms around, and those are the two areas that I was kind of focused on is, the kind of what I'll call the practice expense associated with some of these codes. And then is there new distinct work associated with the analysis? And I will also give you all just a little flavor. We went through a lot of this interpretation and analysis discussion with CMS several years back when we introduced our multi-analyte assays with algorithmic analyses codes, because folks said, well, you just get a score, so there was no analysis there. And so it's like, well, it's a bit more than that. So I think there's a bit more than that here, and I just don't know exactly what it is. So, and I'm not trying to draw a perfect comparison, but that's some of what we hear sometimes, especially from payers, when you talk about things that are, kind of automatically generating something. Well, what's the real work associated with that analysis?
Yeah, Jay, I hear
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear exactly what you're saying. It's actually something the work group's been talking about quite a bit, actually, is this idea of like, there are some codes that seem like they might apply. Think about like 88368 for computer-assisted immunomorphic technology techniques. But again, those codes are created kind of pre-digital pathology. So it's a mixture of kind of the scanning components are new. Some of the analytics could be done by software. There's some human pathologist kind of components. One of the things that makes digital pathology difficult to categorize is there's a lot of different applications. There's some things that just take like an existing HER2 scoring and make it quicker and faster. There's other things that are saying the human eye can't do this, and so it's a completely new analysis. So maybe Joe, you could talk a little bit more about like what's different on the technology side, and then also what's different as a pathologist in terms of hands-on time or work involved, because that is captured in CPT coding with like a TC and a 2.6 modifier, but kind of the professional service, the technical service, and it sounds like we're changing both here.
Yeah, so I thought what you just said is really interesting. The existing code structure could obviously be applied. So for example, here the level 4 code or 88305 is capturing a ton of different things, right? It captures the grossing, the measurements, at the same, that's an interpretation and a physical task, but it also encaptures, sectioning, physical operating the tissue, cover slipping, and then the actual microscopic examination plus the interpretation. Now, what I thought may be helpful for us to understand how this sort of the CPT framework allows for one of the labs that would use slide scanning, and just think about it, it's like using a machine like a next-gen sequencer with a slide, but another lab wouldn't do that. So that part is like, that can't be easily captured with an 88305, although the ultimate task, at least for the most simplistic application, would be, yes, you diagnose it on screen versus on the scope. So you could say, well, that's the same, but there's a different technical procedure attached to it with, all kinds of liabilities. So I think that's the lowest rank. So Charles, what you asked for is like, how far does this go? Right now, you could say this was using an 88305 with a slide scanner, meaning with scanning technology, but then could be and image quantification. So let's say computer assisted, cell counting, which I think there is a code for that, which I think, Charles, you just mentioned the number, but the second layer, or the even higher layer, would be to integrate things across multiple biopsies. And then we would still stay in that realm where what's currently done by a pathologist is integrated mentally. And then comes the part where humans generally lose the ability to do things beyond that, meaning, integration across cases, cross matching with other patients, all kinds of additional algorithmic components. And that falls, we look at, tier 1, tier 2 codes or NGS codes and MAAA codes. That's hard to, I think this group has discussed this many times. It's hard without the complete contextual background of the CPT framework to see whether there were other examples on where something new entered a realm of an existing firmly established framework that can be done almost as if it's optional. And I think, some pathologists would say, well, I don't need to scan every case, while another pathologist would say, oh, I need to scan every single case. Or, it's almost like a pick and choose technology that currently, can't be coded or accounted for. So is there something similar in other, let's say, laboratory or even outside the laboratory realm?
Thanks for that that explanation, Jay. I don't know if you're thinking somewhere along the lines of this, but in radiology, of course, the digitization and especially the AI component has sort of come in earlier than I think some other areas of medicine. And one of the things that's been growing and applications that we've seen in actually creation of, again, what we call category 3 codes, which are the, the early evidence sort of services that don't always get national payment, but often do actually. It's just a little harder to estimate, but there's this growing field in radiology with like just post-processing of existing images in which an AI overlay or algorithmic analysis is applied to an existing image, which provides the interpreting radiologist an additional sort of range or menu of options or additional analysis. It's often sent off. It's often done off campus of where the image is taken. So it goes to post-processing sort of off-site into a potentially even like a cloud assessment, and then comes back. And again, to the extent that there is still physician interpretation, especially like in the management, on the patient management side of it, even if it would come back potentially as a score, there is probably some modified interpretation, whether that's the existing code or if there sort of needs to be sort of some additional sort of reassessment there in terms of the valuation of the interpretation of these type of post-processing events. I think what's a little bit difficult to talk about those, and I don't know, again, it may not directly apply. That's just sort of the thing that came up to me, is that because they're category 3, they don't have what we would call like discrete elements within practice expense with what Jay talked about. So sort of like, what is the clinical staff time involved? How much does this potentially, like, what are the costs associated with the, the vendor designed either device, or, what are the sort of the licensing fees or registration fees for a cloud-based software? So we don't have that sort of that granularity, because I don't think too many of these have come up to, sort of the category 1 area. Again, you have stuff like computer-aided detection, which has been around for decades, which we've used as sort of a model in some AI discussion as well, as just a sort of, again, sort of like additional analysis over existing sort of images. So, radiology is sort of the poster child for a lot of the early stuff that's been happening, especially within CPT. Jay has a deeper knowledge of sort of what's happened currently with pathology. So I don't know if there's
No, that is exactly the model that I was thinking about. And typically what we do when we kind of find these new areas is we look at some structures and some precedent in CPT that you can use as kind of a model for doing that. And AI and what's happening in radiology, and by the way, it's not just pathology, there's some other places where this is becoming important as well, I think is a really good, a good solid starting point. And
Yeah.
honestly, I was coming into this, I was a little concerned that we were going to be talking about like things that ought to be going on the lab fee schedule that were actually ought to be on the physician fee schedule, because we get a lot of pushback from especially certain Medicare administrative contractors on, you know, folks actually going to the lab fee schedule and going to the physician fee schedule, and kind of knowing what you were doing. I was like, oh, but that's not, I understand that that's where you're going. So this is really great. That's why I think actually radiology is a really good kind of model for this.
Can I,
Yeah, just,
can I ask,
oh, go ahead.
just
Sorry,
so-
Joe.
just picking up on this, so Carla, I will remember to ask you again, but as you say, this ascending structure, I think what you called it, right? Like different levels of complexity as you described it. Would you mind explaining to us how these structures, I mean, who comes up with that? Is that happening in like, you know, by expert opinion, or is this discussed in the CPT committee, or because, you know, like that's a different way of thinking about these, let's call it tools or medical procedures. And I'm thinking, for example, in genomics, there's performing the test and then reinterpretation of tests. That's a certain way of thinking that I hadn't seen before. But how, I mean, is there sort of a formal process for just the design of these structures, or?
Zach, I think that was actually back to you. You're the one that mentioned.
Maybe I wasn't quite following sort of directly relating to sort of what I had brought up. I mean, in terms of like intensity, I mean, again, this is not something I could sort of explain in the remaining time that we have, but there are, you know, anytime there's valuation applied to a service, especially within the pathology realm, there would be the AMA conducts a special group of physicians, much like the panel, although again, because the AMA has copyright on CPT, it's sort of published in-house, whereas what we call the RUC, or the Relativity Assessment Work Group, looks at individual sort of services, although again, as Jay said, they don't have jurisdiction over but things that paid on the clinical lab fee schedule. So maybe I'm not quite sure then what you were.
I think the simplest version of the question is like, who came up with the radiology structure? Was it a collaborative effort, or did somebody apply for it? And they said, hey, this is
okay, that's helpful. Yeah, and so that's been an effort. I mean, it's been a sort of, I think, from what I can tell, a collaborative effort between the major medical specialty societies, which are, you know, American College of Radiology, RSNE, the Society of Radiology North America, and some other written race societies and stuff like that. So they've actually been really useful. Well, they've been really active in that space, because oftentimes what CPT will have, especially like in the early days of a technology, is that a lot of individual companies will come forward and sort of like have their own, like, we want, you know, payment or reporting for our little device, but rarely, and maybe they, you know, they probably shouldn't have sort of the eye towards the industry as a whole, because CPT is trying to create services that span a variety of different individual technologies, but to describe broad ranges of services that could be used by multiple companies. So just in that space as well, from what I've seen, is that the industry folks who have worked, who have come forward and been successful in these applications, I think have to some level been collaborative with the national medical specialties, who are, again, are thinking about these, and these, you know, if you go to these radiology you know, conferences and their annual meetings, I mean, they have whole separate now digital tracks to sort of reckon with just the changing nature of these things. And so it's just a lot of collaboration with the national medical specialties, again, who have direct input into the CPT panel process. And so it's like any good lawyer, you sort of want to know what the key folks are going to say before you ask the question. And then so I think that's where it could be helpful to begin these early discussions as well, with the main specialty players in the pathology space.
And I know, Charles, you mentioned IANA, but really the key, especially with, you know, if it's CAP or if it's ASCP or, you know, some of the others, it's starting to engage, you know, some of the clinical specialists within those, the what we call advisors within the CPT process. So each one of these specialties has an advisor. They are nominated by the specialties, appointed by the AMA Board of Trustees. They have a formal role within the CPT process. So it's really good to work through the staff and start working with those specialists. I know, Joe, you mentioned Dr. Blackschaffer, who I've met several times in meetings with CAP. And he was helpful when we were working through issues related to what came out of the Protecting Access to Medicare Act and how we had to deal with lab services and PLA codes. So, there's a lot of great insights from folks like yourselves and those that are within those specialties. And again, from our knowledge, at least my knowledge, I won't speak for Zach, mine is more so in interacting with folks, Joe, like yourself and other clinicians, not so much from the CPT side, but just understanding, clinically how this is working. So I think that next step would really be to start engaging. It sounds like you already have, but continue to engage those specialties and thinking about the different coding mechanisms. And we can, as staff, what we do then is work with their staff to, think through code change applications or help out where we can. And to the extent that we can provide some insights to them, and even some of the models that Zach had mentioned in radiology and some of the other AI work that's going on, we can definitely do that as well.
Carla?
Thanks, Joe. Hi, Carla Leibowitz. I'm with one of the small companies Joe mentioned, and I actually came from AI and radiology. I think one of the big differences here is that the image acquisition piece is not covered at all in pathology, and I think that's one of the things Joe was alluding to, right? In radiology, every MRI scan, every CPT scan has some sort of payment for the amortization of the capital equipment that that hospital uses. But in pathology, there's no reimbursement at all for buying those scanners that are really expensive. What's happened in Europe is that a lot of countries are sponsoring the purchase of scanners because they see this as really important to improve the quality and efficiency of the pathology workforce. But in the US, no such mechanisms exist. And so even just creating a CPT code for the act of digitization is one of the things we wanted to discuss, because right now the few practices that have gone digital in the US are doing it kind of on an ROI basis, but it's really hindered adoption.
Really helpful, thanks.
Yeah, and we highlight some of them in the slide here, just thinking about the way the current coding is created and recognizing that there is a kind of practice expense and then also professional component. And so in some ways, digital pathology is disruptive because it changes the underlying practice expense. Like Joe showed us his microscope, which hopefully wasn't harvested from his son's junior high classroom, but it's hopefully a nicer microscope. But I mean, that's fundamentally the underlying equipment, other than cutting the slide and kind of preparing grossing for that analysis. But slide scanners is a big barrier to entry and then kind of ecosystem cost. And then we also highlight the analytic components of, like, it's one thing if it still resides as, like, now it's a pathologist looking at a digital image, then I would say it's a fairly similar process. But then once you start to apply software tools, Joe mentioned it's kind of software that highlights different regions, and there's some complexity and cost associated with that. And then also, I'm excited about the future of digital pathology because it could allow us to get into areas that we can't see right now. I'm doing a ton of work in the oncology space, and we're talking about tumor microenvironments and neoantigens and TILs. These are not things that pathologists, even the best pathologists, can succinctly visualize. You need to start to get to software levels to kind of truly understand what's going on there, which I think is a little bit beyond the kind of broader, pale of where CPT has been historically. So if we could go to the next slide, we've just outlined a couple different initial thoughts in terms of some potential options here. And one of the things I've been talking to this group about is, well, maybe it's not just one code. Like it doesn't make sense to me to just try and create the digital pathology code. It may be specific different applications. And there may be some base coding that would be like for slide scanning, underlying procedures, and then some additional codes that would get layered on top if you're doing some of these novel analytic methods. So that's what we're thinking about, is like kind of a mixture of, like, maybe some of the current codes are still used, but then add-on codes that supplement them. Maybe there's a different code for a distinct technical procedure that would be associated with a different TC value. And so if you can just go to the next slide after this one, there are basically three constructs that we had kind of outlined and briefly. So one is you could simply, if you go back one, Laura. So one is you could just take the existing codes and put modifiers on them. You could just say, okay, same pathology procedure, but now with some kind of imaging component that's like digitized. So maybe it's like now with 8305 with underlying whole slide scanning or something. But our concern with that is like it would just be adding like a technical component. It wouldn't necessarily capture some of the novel things. You could create maybe a series, and this is where the radiology piece might be very useful to understand that, but a series of novel codes for digital pathology procedures, like a slide scanning procedure and then a slide scanning plus analysis. And maybe that can be graded on the complexity. So it's like multi-parametric analysis could be one code versus if you have a machine learning algorithm or using a neural network or something like that. Now there's like on a scale, I'm thinking about like the MOPATH tier 2 codes with the 9 levels, something like that. One of the things I've been advocating for is there's the PLA system, and some of these algorithms are proprietary. And I could imagine if you create a bespoke algorithm that leverages digital pathology techniques, you could say, well, let's just go out and get a unique code to that specific application. It's a breast cancer recurrence stratification tool that uses digital pathology. Okay, well, let's create a code that's specific to that tool. So that's kind of the range of options we are thinking about. And this group is going to continue to work on this and kind of identify this. We love the idea of setting up this kind of dialogue and participating in the dialogue with you about thinking about what the right structures and codes and options are. We'll definitely take a look at the radiology benefit, what has happened there in terms of radiology codes. I know we only have about 5 minutes left. I guess one of my big questions is, what can we do to be helpful to you? Is it coming to you with more examples of digital pathology technology applications? Is it trying to further noodle out like what a preferred structure would be from our perspective? Say this is the group's consensus opinion, or would it be just connecting you to other groups to talk more about this?
No, I think so. Could I just, in reaction to this slide, I would not be, as to my earlier comment, as excited about the last option there, because I think we're talking about physician or other qualified healthcare professional work, and I think it's really physician work that is not captured, and it should not be captured within a PLA code. The PLA codes are really intended for the clinical lab fee schedule, and I do not see this as anything that looks like that. So, I mean, it's really, so at this point, what we can offer is the same question back to you, Charles. It's like, okay, we know the specialties. You probably all do as well. And I kind of look at the chat every now and then. There's some other specialties outside of the classic pathology ones that would, that might be involved as well. We can certainly provide the contacts, the staff contacts within those specialties to actually start talking about that. We don't provide the actual advisors, but we can provide the staff contacts to really get this going. Because ultimately, it's really helpful for Zach and I to hear this, because it's the Zach team that has to manage the process, but it's ultimately yourselves and then working with those other companies and other specialties that are bringing something forward to the panel. So this stuff all day, to be quite honest. And I'm so thrilled to see the microscope by Joe there, even though he's not as excited about it. I rather enjoy it, because when I'm on with Dr. Sinovic, that microscope is there all the time. So it's good to see. But at any rate, I think it's really, we're always willing to have these conversations, but I think to kind of move this, I think we need to really start involving those specialties. And I think, sounds like you've had some conversations. I think they'd be very, very open to it, because obviously their members are very, knowledgeable in these areas. They might not agree with every opinion, but they're very knowledgeable, and I think would be open to having those discussions. I would say that to me, there might be some modification of existing codes, but it might be worth looking at, some of the, some variations in kind of the second scenario that you've got there. And that's just off the top of my head after this 1 hour conversation.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Go ahead.
So we collaborate with several of the key, professional organizations, and they're in part members here. So there's a lot of, CAP DPA, you know, API. We have the representation. Just as a concrete thing, I know the 20-page application for a new CPT code, but what comes just before that, right? Like, because we're still sort of in the ideation stage of what, you know, Charles has presented here. We don't have the necessary background, let's say, of the CPT framework to just propose something, but we could, and then have a larger discussion. But could we maybe jointly organize that, or how does that normally work with the CPT panels?
So it can vary. So if what you're suggesting is to maybe have a little backgrounder on the application process, you know, we could certainly involve even one of our staff members who works on you know, a lot of these, you know, applications to do a little bit of that. You know, for us, it's, you know, we think about it in terms of as a category 1 application, which is the thing we were talking about here, or at least I think that's what Charles is suggesting. There are also CPT category 3 codes for emerging technologies. I'm not sure if that's what's being proposed, but I mean, if we needed to just kind of walk through how that works, I think we could certainly do that. I know Charles has had some experience there with the application. Yeah.
Yeah, and Jay, what I think makes sense to me is I really like this idea of like connecting with the staff contacts, because what I want to avoid is a situation where, you know, one entity moves forward with one application and then puts the onus on you to figure out, well, is this going to create unintended harm, or is this in favor of one particular application, not the others? Because I would like to be in a position where it's like, okay, we've talked to most everybody and we think that this will work for, you know, obviously, you know, it's going to be a compromise, so it's not going to be perfect for everybody, but we think this is a positive step forward, and it includes, you know, pathology and some of the people using things, the applications clinically. I think it is a bit difficult because the system is in transition right now. There's a lot of new things on the table, and so it's like, you know, it's the same thing we did with the next generation sequencing, which is like you want to be ahead of the curve, but you don't want to be so far out on the curve that you're like contemplating products that no one has even thought about making yet, you know. So there's going to be that right balance, and that might be involved like a dialogue with Dr. Sinovic and some of these other kind of staff folks as well, just kind of figuring out where that right balance is. So I think today has been great just in terms of getting an understanding of kind of your kind of ingoing perspectives. Hopefully this is a helpful introduction to you. Now you know this group exists, so as digital pathology things kind of emerge, you can use this as a channel. I think this group would be very, very happy to dialogue with you about it. And if you can send those contacts with those other folks that we should probably interact with, I think we can continue to do more coalition building, consensus building around maybe not coming up with the perfect option, but at least understanding what some of the dynamics are and what some of the trade-offs between different approaches are, so that that some of the thinking has been done. By the time that application gets submitted, it's more just endorsing what has been output of this dialogue, less like putting the onus on you to try and solve all the problems at once.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. I really like this summary, because I just wanted to add that it's like it's the entire chain of this entire digital pathology. It's not like a specific intended use or one specific device. So thank you for that summary. Good. I think we are on the dot, right? It's, well, even 1 minute too late. Over time. So yeah, we have clear actions then. I see next steps. So is there anything else anyone wants to bring up? Otherwise we could conclude the meeting, right?
I do need to run, so I just want to say thank you all very much for the time. Very much appreciate it, and look forward to talking again.
Thanks so much, Jay and Zach. Thanks to the rest as well.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.